Now, US President Joe Biden has called for an immediate ceasefire following a tense phone call between the Israeli Prime Minister and the American President.
Well, during the conversation, Netanyahu also promised to open 2 new aid corridors into Gaza in the first such talks since Israel killed 7 aid workers on Monday.
Well, let's get the thoughts of former advisor to the Clinton and Bush administrations, Steve Gill. Good to see you this morning, Steve.
Good morning.
What do you make of this tense 30-minute phone call between Joe Biden and Benjamin Netanyahu?
Well, first of all, I think the fact that Joe Biden is calling for a ceasefire from Israel without issuing a similar call to Hamas, who are continuing to hold hostages from that atrocious attack on Israel, would make for a tense conversation. And second, you've got Joe Biden calling for the political ousting of Netanyahu by Israel. If somebody was calling for Joe Biden to get defeated in the election, a foreign power, I think he'd be a little testy when they had their first conversation as well.
Yeah, but, you raise perfectly valid points, Steve. Of course you do. But with all of this, the international community has turned against Israel now in all of this, hasn't it? I mean, not because of what they went through in October, but because of how absolutely brutal the response has been. Now, the big question is Israel really going to listen to what America is telling it?
I think there's pressure on them, particularly since Joe Biden and the administration are threatening to cut off arms shipments. You've got the UK threatening to cut off arms shipments to Israel to try and force their hand to be much more soft in dealing with Gaza at this point. But you're exactly right. I mean, the world community is starting to turn their attention to Israel as they fight in this extremely tight environment. And it is almost impossible to hit targets without having some level of civilian casualty. And the question is, can they just leave Hamas in place, with Hamas threatening that they will do, again, what they've done to Israel? They're not backing off at all. So Israel's really in a hard place. They have to eliminate Hamas as a threat, and while trying to virtually eliminate any possibility of civilian casualties. I don't think anybody seriously thinks that Israel intentionally was hitting these aid convoys, even though some are claiming that. I think it's just in war in tight confines, there will be civilian casualties. And at some point, you've got the Hamas terrorists that are continuing to attack these convoys, steal the food and medicine that's intended for civilians. So it's a difficult situation all around. And I think you have to give Israel some latitude, while at the same time demanding they be very, very careful about civilian casualties.
Steve, just how likely do you think it could be that Joe Biden would consider limiting arms sales to Israel or limiting intelligence sharing? Because both of those options are on the table, but he's been criticised for that being simply just threats, just words.
Well, I think the intelligence capabilities are more important than ever. You need to be giving Israel everything that we have, that the West has, of where targets are appropriate and those that are not, to try and make better lines between what would be a legitimate target and what might put civilians at risk. At the same time, Joe Biden is playing a political calculus. He has real issues with the Muslim community in the U.S. in key battleground states like Michigan and Minnesota that he has to carry in November to win re-election. And you have a lot of protest, Free Palestine kinds of protest, and even heckling at his own events. He's playing that political calculation, calculating that the Jewish vote in the U.S. is not as significant to him in those states as trying to make sure that the Muslim vote in those states stays sided with him. So he's playing a political calculation, and cutting off arms may or may not help him or hurt him in November.
OK, Steve, good to see you this morning. Thanks very much indeed. Would love to know your thoughts today. GBViews at GBnews.com. Whatever America does, should we stop sending arms over there if they're being used and killing civilians to the level they are at the moment in Gaza? It's a hugely difficult and complex situation where people have got every sympathy with what Israel went through. Have they responded appropriately?